Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Jim Jaffer, the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer at the Veterans Affairs Department. Now, Jim, before break, we were talking about the move to the cloud. You mentioned some application rationalization that's going on. You mentioned vendors as well. And I want to start there with the acquisition side. I know you're not a quote-unquote acquisition guy, but the CIO is supposed to play a big role. And in fact, I wrote a story just recently about some new responsibilities, some new authorities that the VA gave you as CIO over acquisition. So let's start there. What are some of those lessons you've learned about the pandemic when it comes to technology acquisition? And then we can move on to maybe some implementation as well.
Well, sure. Jason, let me go ahead and address, I think, what you're talking about in the article, and certainly our Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, processes within the department. And I think in your past article, you're referencing an IG report, and those authorities are out there. They exist. We certainly execute them every day. I think part of it is, non-IT leaders and organizations in the department and in other federal agencies really understanding that, right? And really understanding, I think it's our job, our responsibility as IT professionals to really educate leadership and our super users within the department, why it's important. And I think we have, plenty of use cases. LaWanda Jones is my Deputy Chief Information Officer for Strategic Sourcing. She leads that. I do multiple FITARA reviews every week. And again, it's about making sure that programs are aligned with the resources, that we have the right spend, that we're not provisioning redundant capabilities within the enterprise, and getting that cost efficiency. So again, I think it's largely an education piece, and it's really our responsibility to show the department. You talked earlier about that budget and that that constant tension of an IT budget struggling to support a very large $100 billion discretionary enterprise. And so it's really, the FITARA review process is really instrumental to make sure that we are optimizing every dollar of spend that we have out there.
I have to say, there was a lot of people who responded to the story regarding the VA just is getting this quote unquote policy in place now. It doesn't mean you weren't doing that previously. I think that it's sometimes policies lag behind action, and you're shaking your head. So let me stop there and let you kind of jump in, but I have something more to add.
Sure. No, I would just reinforce to your comment again. It's really that folks understand that there are CIO authorities. They don't always fully understand the every aspect and nuance of those, and it's our responsibility to really show why FITARA exists, how we do our review process, and then the corresponding value and efficiency that the department derives by having that process, and having folks, whether it's administration dollars, as in VBA, VHA, or NCA, or whether it's an IT centralized appropriation dollar, why it's going towards the best and most cost-effective solution that we have out there.
One of the interesting things about the pandemic, and I'll call it a little bit of a silver lining, a lot of the non-IT people realize how important IT is to get their work done. And where maybe your relationship or your discussions with the program folks or your discussions with the CFO folks were, yeah, Jim, just get it done. Don't get us hacked. Just make sure my XYZ works, email, applications, laptop, cell phone, you fill in the blank. And this really enabled, what I've heard from a lot of CIOs, for people to kind of take a half a step back and realize the importance of a CIO, the importance of your office. Give me a sense about how those conversations have been happening over the last few months, and how you hope to continue them moving forward to ensure that value chain, that value discussion doesn't go away just because the pandemic recedes.
Yeah, no, the information technology, I often use the metaphor that it's like oxygen. People really don't appreciate it till it's gone. And so while I think we had over my previous 18 months of tenure with the department, I came in saying we were going to have a ruthless kind of, almost obsession-like focus on the businesses, right? And business outcomes, because I think that's where technology leaders kind of go astray, is when they focus only on technology outcomes and not the derivative value that they derive for the business. In terms of the pandemic, certainly with our CFO, John Rachowski, great partnership as we were talking with VHA and the other administrations and staff offices, figuring out what the impacts were going to be, how the businesses were going to address those. By the way, the one that is probably was least understood, even by me necessarily, was in a national emergency. Most of your listeners and viewers are probably not aware that the Veterans Health Administration, the VA, becomes the national healthcare system of record. And I explained to some of our vendors, I said, God forbid, but there might be in a particular locality, one of your non-veteran employees may end up getting healthcare in a VA facility. And so that just to really bring home to our vendor partners the seriousness of our mission and our requirement vis-a-vis the national emergency and the president's declaration to provide that service. So, again, obviously in the midst of a pandemic, VHA is front and center. And that relationship with the CFO and with our business partner around understanding what their demands were, so working closely with VHA, and then building that package through OMB to go up to the Hill for that supplemental appropriation. Because as I mentioned to you before, while we're grateful for it, and we are, there is no way that we would have been able to meet the demands of the Department of VHA without that. And then again, I stressed, the other thing, and this came up with Suzette Kent and the Federal CIO Council as we're aggregating our lessons learned, is around the Defense Production Act. And we found that kind of Cold War era legislation that's really focused on national security needs doesn't necessarily set the right stage for the prioritization of healthcare agencies in the middle of a pandemic. And so, we've got some work, I think, afterwards legislatively to make sure that, for subsequent waves or subsequent pandemics, which, probably won't be another 100 years, that we have the right, kind of government acquisition strategy and posture to address it. Because candidly, if we had not, again, had the great relationship we did with our vendor partners, we would not have had the same outcomes we did.
I want to just tag back to something you mentioned, the great partnership with the CFO. I imagine your partnership is the same with the Chief Acquisition Officer, with the Chief Human Capital Officer. How often did you meet? How often do you meet now? Obviously, a lot of Zoom calls probably, but how has that relationship changed in any way?
I think for the department and for those CXO positions you just mentioned, it was certainly a bit of an increase in the cadence. I think where we saw the greatest change was inside of even just the Office of Information Technology. Right, I've had several of my deputy chief information officers that say, "Hey, I'm in the same building with my colleague, and I meet more with him now than I did when we were in the same building." I think, and again, the part of that is people acknowledging, both information technology professionals and non-IT folks, the criticality of the technology in terms of, continuity, business continuity, right? We talk about, safeguarding our employees and taking care of them. And while that's critically important, what's also critically important is continuation of operations, COOP and business continuity. And I know that in our first physical meeting back here at VA Central Office, I was really gratified that unsolicited, that several of our staff, senior staff said, "Wow, the new tools that your team is provisioning and the responsiveness and the reliability of the remote access networks and what you're providing in telehealth, what you're enabling has just been phenomenal." And so, again, our team did a tremendous job, and I think our business partners have largely acknowledged it. Now, again, the only easy day was yesterday, right? What are you doing for me tomorrow?
We're just about at a break, but I just want to add one more piece to this. The vendor relationship has been also key. You mentioned them several times. I've talked to Suzette Kent as well, the federal CIO, who mentioned this idea of so much kudos go to the vendors. Any quick stories you'd provide about a vendor who stepped up, or somebody who came through with licenses, or some way that you kind of pushed it faster, better, to get the tools and the capabilities out to the VHA, VBA folks quicker?
Sure. I'll give you, and again, these are not designed to be endorsements or commercials, but I want to give them credit, and I'll give you two quick examples. The first one was, we call them activations within the VA parlance. So when a new medical facility or some other facility is brought into service, we activate that. When you look at the IT provisioning of that, the normal pace, non-national emergency is anywhere around 4 months. Because when you think about it, right, having to get all the easement access and the lease lines pulled in, and go out and procure the endpoints and all the infrastructure, all this LAN and WAN switching and that goes into the facility. We, working with our carrier partners with AT&T and others and CenturyLink, we were able to provision the medical clinic in Garland, Texas in, wait for it, 21 days. 21 days from the time that VHA said, we want to open this facility until data flowing in the facility, full access with endpoints on desktops, 21 days. And, we often cite that as an example of, with the right focus and the right staffing and the right budget, you can do anything, right? And that's what we're able to do with those variables. The other example I would offer to you is, the criticality of the trusted internet connections in our 4 gateways. And I'll tell you candidly that pre-COVID, we had an unfunded requirement around some upgrades for our TIC gateways. And in our council meetings with our partners, it was voted as a low priority. Well, guess what? COVID hit, and that changes the day entirely. And I can tell you that our business partners now, we've had this kind of candid conversation after the fact. They now realize that you can have the best application and services out there, but if you can't get in either VPN or access gateway into the network, then it doesn't matter a hill of beans, right? And so, working with Cisco, for example, at the at those data centers to upgrade, working with the carriers with AT&T and CenturyLink to double the bandwidth, those were the real math and real science of real things to provision that sort of capacity to allow our users to have the experience that they needed. And without those, real things and real money, we would not have achieved those.
Excellent examples. Obviously, we know not an endorsement, but just facts. You got it done because you need to get it done. Jim, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue our conversation. My guest today is Jim Jaffer, the Assistant Secretary for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at the Veterans Affairs Department. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Network.